Hi, everyone. Excited to talk about BRRRRing out of state. We're getting a lot of questions lately on how on earth can you use the BRRRR method even still today as well as out of state. And so really excited to have Greg and Nee joining us. Let's go ahead. I'll do a quick introduction and then let's just dive right in. Nee, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've invested in what, 8 states?
Nine as of yesterday.
There we go, 9 as of yesterday. And so Nee just closed on 3 properties yesterday off of the deal list, and he'll be walking us through those. And so without further ado, Nee, go ahead. Let's dive into your presentation, and then we'll take Q&A after.
So my name is Nee Lee. I'm a Vietnamese immigrant. Here's my family. It's not the best picture of us, but it's a recent picture, and the kids look cute, so that's all that matters. I didn't list any hobbies in my personal just because I'm a workaholic. And I have 2 young kids, so maybe sleeping is a hobby, but it's a very minimal hobby at this point. Professionally, I am a husky, UW husky, and a data nerd. So I was climbing the corporate ladder until I found real estate, and then my day job just seemed really uninteresting, right? But luckily, real estate gave me the experience and knowledge that I needed to ditch my college degrees and join a startup called Certain Lending, where I get to talk to real estate investors all day and create loan products that I actually would want to use as an investor. And then on the real estate side, I started with fix and flips for the first 3 years. And then in 2017, I had my first child, and I realized that flipping was just another job. And I needed to build passive income now so that later on I can retire when it mattered, right? When the kids start remembering things and they want to do more things and want to have social events, right? I think COVID-19 gave me a couple more years on those social events. So for the next 2 years after my first child, I invested in 7 other states outside of Washington. And I tried many different things with many different partners. If you don't know me, I tend to go full speed when I start something new. When I started flipping, I purchased 8 flips in a 6-month period. I actually don't recommend that to anyone, by the way. And so, I have a lot of interesting stories, a lot of failure stories in real estate, but that's probably for another day. So my investment strategy for out-of-state BRRRRs, I try to aim for something either the 2.5% rule. So the 1% rule, that's spoken a lot on Bigger Pockets. It means that, if you're buying something that's $100,000, you're renting it for 1% a month or $1,000 a month, right? So 2.5% rule would be renting for $2,500 per month on a $100,000 purchase. And I've actually put cost there because I actually include both the purchase and the rehab because you have to do that for BRRRRs. But that was my criteria in the beginning. So nowadays it's changed a little bit. If I need to leave money in there, or if it's more turnkey in some ways, or there's not enough margins, then I want a higher cash flow. Otherwise, if I'm getting some money back from the BRRRR method, then I would go for lower cash flow. I used to chase 3% rule deals, right? But they were always in rougher areas. And I was comfortable with rougher areas because I grew up in a C-class area here in Seattle. Now, life is just so complicated, I just want less headaches. I can tell you that rural areas, there's a lot of disadvantages. It's hard to find good teams in rural areas, and then there's not much competition. Competition is what drives your vendors to do good work at reasonable prices. But if you only have one property manager or one plumber in multiple counties, you're not getting the best people. The $150,000 price point is pretty interesting. So the first out-of-state property that I bought was $22,000 in Pennsylvania, and like an hour north of Pittsburgh. Do you guys know how hard it is to finance something that's worth $22,000, right? If you were trying to buy $150,000, it's actually going to cost you less than trying to buy $50,000 because you're probably going to have to buy that $50,000 property in cash versus you can finance a $150,000 property. In general, getting a loan under $100,000 is difficult. And the reason I mentioned $150,000 as a threshold is because a 70% LTV loan on $150,000 would be about $105,000. So it gives you some wiggle room to stay above $100,000 in case the appraisal comes back lower. Don't play by the edges. Aim for maybe $200,000 above. Number 3, I try to focus on small multifamily that's still considered residential. In my experience, multifamily cash flow is better than single family. It also helps you get that price point up, right? In some of these areas, otherwise you're not going to hit $150,000 or more. I don't try to venture into the 5+ multifamily that much because that's more of commercial land and things get a little bit more complicated there. It's harder to finance, it takes longer to analyze, and I'm at the point where if I can't make a decision to buy something in 5 minutes, I move on, right? So I'm very familiar with the 1 to 4 unit space, so it allows me to move pretty fast. On the partnerships, so I've always invested with partners from the very beginning, even when I was doing flips. I have a very demanding day job, and I wouldn't be able to work 80 hours a week and invest on the side, nor would I be able to do it in multiple states. My role in the partnerships usually is I handle them with the more strategic side of things. I handle the acquisition, right, even the deal flow, and then I also handle the financing. And then my partners tend to take over after it closes to manage the day-to-day operations. So I'm pretty hands-off, and I'm not required to be by the phone all day. Number 5 is, if you read the BRRRR book, right, from David Green from Bigger Pockets, I think it's actually an investing book, actually. So he says that the strategy is you pick a market and then you find your team, right? I'm the exact opposite. So I find a team first and then I see what markets they're in. I don't invest in a market unless I have people on the ground that I trust. And I have never visited any of my out-of-state properties. And so I rely heavily on my team. So, I talk to people, I get referred to other people, and then I find out what market they're in, and then I explore that market. I don't pick a market first and then try to find a team. And then last point is, I always start with financing. I always like having a professional lender analyze the deal and watch my back. And I like to structure things to maximize the back-end financing with BRRRRs. So a quick summary of, and this is all in the conventional BRRRR terms, because that's what most BRRRRs are, right? So when you're doing a refinance, there's 2 types of refinances in the conventional world. There's a rate term refinance, and then there's a cash out refinance. A rate term refinance pays off an existing loan, whereas a cash out refinance doesn't care whether or not there's a loan on the property. It just lends based on the value of the property. Obviously, there's clear downsides for cash out right now. Usually a seasoning period, there's lower LTVs compared to rate term, and then you're actually paying a higher loan cost for doing cash out versus rate term. And that cost it really depends on the lender, the type of loan, the LTV, and your credit score. So I've seen somewhere between 3/8 of a point or even 2.5 points, depending on the situation. For those who are doing delayed financing, keep in mind that that still falls on the cash out side. You might get past the first part and not need to season for 6 months, but you're still subject to lower LTVs and higher loan costs, right? So my preference for me is I always try to find a way to buy it with a loan, even if you have cash. Like, I don't know, ask a friend, give them the cash, ask them to put a lien in the property for you, and then do a rate term. Maybe talk to your loan officer first before you do that. So, if you can always structure your loan upfront and the acquisition, you'll never have to play by cash out rules. And that's what my goal is when I do these deals, right? So I'll show you that on the deal that's coming up. So I saw this deal on Agents Invest in early July, but then I was beaten out by another investor who already had a relationship and had started talking to the agent. At that point, I decided to spend time just building rapport with that agent because I knew I wanted to buy in this area and I wanted to be on first dibs on that agent's list. So a couple of weeks passed and then that buyer fell out of contract. So I followed up with a realtor again, and then she knew at that time, based on our conversations, that I was a serious buyer. We didn't actually get into contract until about 3 weeks later, on like August 7th, because I was pretty adamant on getting contractor bids before I signed a contract, because I knew that my lender needed that to start the loan process. And then I told her I can close 2 weeks from when I got that bid. So we're going to walk through the numbers, the financing, and the entire journey of this deal. Purchase price rehab, obviously provided by the wholesaler or the realtor. She also gave me the ARV, but then I also ran my own numbers. I have access to an AVM called House Canary. It's called an automatic valuation model. It's like almost like a Zestimate, but usually these are a little bit better than Zestimates and more accurate. And so I did that to get the current value, and I did that to get my own ARV. So I used that to structure the refinance, right? So I always start with the end. So in BRRRRs, you start backwards, but you start with the refinance. You ask yourself, what does that loan need to look like? And then you structure your upfront purchase to make that work. I put the minimum ARV there because you want to use the worst case in case anything goes wrong. But when you actually are structuring the refinance, you want to be able to maximize the best case scenario. So I actually used 75% of the maximum ARV of the 2. So when I structure the liens up front, right, I make sure that the sum of all the liens that I get when I close, so that's right now that's structuring hard money and private money, is equivalent to that refi loan. I can also structure the payoffs for these loans to be a little bit higher in case, maybe the appraisal comes out higher than we expected, and I can take advantage of that, right? If you notice, there's a 6-unit deal involved in here, and so that plays by a different rule, not by conventional rules. So in my experience, they just go based either on cost or on value. They don't really pay off a loan. I did the other 2 deals, the triplex and the fourplex first, and then whatever else I shifted towards the sixplex. I try to structure everything with private money so that I don't have to come into the table with money. I have money for reserves and I keep it that way, but we're talking about BRRRRs and doing things with no money. So let's talk about the upfront loan a little bit more. So my lender was willing to finance 80% of the purchase and 100% of the rehab. And they want to do all three properties as one loan, cross-collateralized, right? So it's a blanket loan on all three properties. This is because there was that sixplex involved. And so usually that gets into the commercial financing space, and usually they want higher loan amounts. And so they wouldn't finance it by itself, but if I put all three into one loan, that loan becomes big enough for them to take on the deal. So I had my hard money lender lined up for this deal since the beginning of July. But remember that I didn't lock it up until August 7th. That's when I told my lender that I have it locked up. Let's get this going. I need to close in 2 weeks. And then my lender came back and asked a question. Just curious, what are the assignment fees? I was wondering why she asked that question because I had given her both the purchase contract and the assignment contract. And from our conversation, it didn't seem like she cared about assignment fees in the past, but it's really my fault for not asking her directly and gotten, that settled beforehand. So I checked the purchase contract that I gave her, and then I saw the purchase price blacked out. And then I thought, uh-oh. Usually when someone wants to hide something, it's probably not a good sign, right? My agent said she actually didn't have the original contracts and needed to get it from another wholesaler. And at that point, I was starting to wonder how many wholesalers were involved in the deal, which also led me to think, uh-oh, right? Because I'm pretty sure the assignment fee is going to blow my mind. About 5 days later, I finally got the original contract on August 12th. And sure enough, my worst dreams came true. I don't know how much experience you guys have with assignment fees, but here in Seattle, we rarely see something more than like maybe 10 to 15% of the purchase price. And here you have one deal that's almost 100% of the contract price, which is insane, right? So if you haven't had enough experience with hard money lenders, most of them will finance somewhere between 0 to 20% of the assignment fee in relation to the original contract price. So the one that I had lined up to do the deal would only finance 5%. And we tried to kind of move things around. I asked her, what if I shifted the assignment fee somewhere and then had another lender take that one? But in the end, we couldn't make it work, which was sad because we saw all these like 4 things about why this deal was hard, right? They were able to close fast. They were able to land on the 6th unit. They were able to allow second lien so I can structure my back-end financing. They just can't do the large assignment fee. So in the end, my lender dropped out, and now I have 7 business days left to close on this deal, and I don't have a lender. So over the next couple of days, I applied for loans with about a dozen local Texas hard money lenders. And I knew I was going to pay more for it because usually local lenders tend to be more expensive, but I needed someone who could move fast and was flexible to get past the 4 things that you see here. As I talked more and more with them, I was pretty surprised that most of them still required an appraisal, because here in Washington State, most local lenders did not require an appraisal. And not only that, but they were telling me that appraisals were backed up about almost 30 days in that area. Closing in 7 days started getting a little bit harder. And I really also did not want to pay for a commercial appraisal because that can be up to like 5 times the cost of a residential appraisal, and it takes much longer. So applied with 12 lenders, and one by one, I kept getting denied by them. Each one of them could only do maybe 1 or 2 of those 4 things, but not all 4. All right, so I had 1 week left to close. It was the weekend before my week of closing, and then I was starting to complain to one of my lender friends here in Washington, and that got me somewhere. And we have a good relationship, but I never thought to ask them to lend on these deals, especially in Texas, because they've only lent in Washington before. But they said, hey, Nate, the deal makes sense, and more importantly, we trust you. This isn't something that we would do for someone else. If there's 2 things that I can teach you about being successful in real estate or successful in life, I think the first is to focus on providing value, right? On giving and sharing without expecting something in return. And the second is to network and build relationships all the time. It's how I stumbled upon certain lending where I work. It's how I get deals. And it's what brought me to this very moment where this lender, my friend that I built a relationship with 2 years ago, is saving my butt on this deal. And of course, there's also a third thing that I can tell you is that just always be grateful. That's how you get the right attitude to the other 2 things, right? So I hope you guys realize that the fact that you guys are here right now in this webinar, and the fact that you're pursuing real estate means that you're probably in the top 5% of the country. And then Take this from an immigrant who had to flee his own country. The fact that you're in the US itself means that you're already better off than the majority of the world. So be grateful. And by being here, you already have the right mindset. It's just a matter of time before you actually get to your destination of financial freedom. Back to the numbers. I went a little philosophical. So on Tuesday, 3 days before the closing date, my new lender agreed to do this loan for us. And then we started structuring how the finance would look like. So I had to let them take a second lien on 2 Washington properties for them to be comfortable kind of blindly investing in this deal, right? And I say blindly investing because they didn't really do any due diligence on the borrowers, so me and my partner, or the deal itself, right? They're just really trusting us based on our relationship that we've built. And notice that they're actually providing more than 100% financing on these properties, which is pretty cool. When I'm buying these properties, instead of bringing money to close, I get cash back at closing. So we structured it so that 2 Texas residential deals were cross-collateralized together into one loan, along with a Washington property. So now we're crossing properties in different states, right? And then the commercial property was cross-collateralized with another property in Washington state that my partner actually owned. And then I put my second liens behind that cross first lien on these Texas properties, again, just to get that final refi loan amount that I'm looking for. So to do this, all of this, we needed to engage a Washington attorney to draft up all the Washington documents and note itself. We were planning to have escrow draft the documents that we needed on the Texas side. So this is all 3 days before closing. Well, 2 days before closing, so now it's Wednesday morning, escrow says, no, our attorney is either going to draft all the documents, so include the note or none of it. And my lender wasn't comfortable with that because she wanted to use the attorney that she's always used, and he already started working on it. So now I needed to find a new Texas attorney that can get these docs drafted in 1 day. I actually called a few attorneys. I've actually found one, but he was going to charge for each deed of trust that he was going to draft. And then that's when I decided I'm not using second liens anymore. And went back to my first lender and said, hey, can we just structure the first lien to be the amount that I need? And then just move the delta away from the commercial property. So that's what we did. So that's what these new lien amounts are. If you look at the previous page, you'll see that the first liens are still the same total amount. We just kind of shifted things around. Then escrow told us that, we were planning to do this into 2 separate loans, right? One was the 2 residential properties were supposed to be combined together into one loan, and then the 6 plots was into another loan. And then escrow told us, nope, we can't do that. I mean, this is registered as 3 separate transactions, so we had to close it in 3 separate transactions. And that was hard. So we had to kind of redo things on our end 2 days before closing on the docs on the Washington attorney's side. My lender still needed a lien attached to Washington property to be comfortable doing these things. So what happened was that we still used the same 2 properties, but we liened the same property twice, one in second lien position and one in third lien position, each individually with a Texas property. I am sorry, guys, but this is getting complicated. Nobody wanted to be this complicated, but this is the solution that we saw 2 days before closing to get to the finish line. And the unfortunate part is that when you do more transactions and the attorneys on both the Washington and Texas side have to draft more documents, there's more costs, right? That's basically another $2,500 out the window. But we closed, except we closed late, right? So there were other complications that came up. Escrow had a lot of fights with my lender and the Washington attorney. Even at the signing table, I was signing things. I had to call them and said, you guys need to figure this out because I need to be done with signing. They figured it out. We signed. So in the end, we closed, and that's it. Any questions?
Nee, that was incredible. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat box. I want to level up to Nee's level. Nee lives on the wild side. He's a financing ninja. And so this is fantastic. Talk about challenges and just finding a solution at every curve. What are your thoughts on using HELOC to finance cash transactions?
So obviously it's a way to be competitive, right? And then I think usually most these people who do these transactions end up using delayed financing or cash out later on to refinance to get the money out of the BRRRR. I mean, obviously definitely encourage it. Just make sure that you're still pre-qualified to get the loan when you refi. Make sure you always check with your mortgage loan officer on that. If it was me though, like I mentioned, I always prefer to do rate term refinances than cash out. So I would somehow, again, get someone to get me a loan on it. And then that way I can just reap the benefits of rate term.
near where your property is located, and thank you for the presentation.
So Washington, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Iowa, and now Texas.
Okay, we'll get you a scratch map.
There,
All right,
there are a
so
few states that I'm one and done.
okay.
So I guess I count that towards 9. But my goal isn't to be everywhere, guys. My goal is really to simplify my life. I just have some loose ends to catch up on certain states too, though.
Quinn asked the question that I was going to ask, which is when you say one and done, with what states and why?
It's mainly because of the team. I didn't have as strong of a team that I thought, and didn't have a good partnership as I structured as well. So a lot of them were also flips. I hate flipping.
And for those listening, why do you hate flipping? Jennifer and I saw you laughing, Jennifer. We know how we feel about flipping, but for those that are scratching their heads, what do you mean you don't like flipping? Why?
I think there's just too much risk. I think the worst part for me is just managing contractors, right? I think some of them are. I have a list of the top 3 sketchiest people I know in real estate. Number 1 is contractors. Number 2 is wholesalers. And number 3 is actually real estate investors. So, but yeah, no, I mean, I just hated, dealing with contractors. We were just never on the same page, and it's a job, right? And everyone needs to realize that flipping is a job. You're trading time for money. And for me, I'd rather have a job where I don't have to worry about like things flooding in the middle of the night, right? Where I can work remotely, where I have benefits. So I'm not going to trade another job for flipping again. So, and all the benefits of flipping you can actually get from burning these days too, if you find the right deal. So it's just, I think flipping is very risky. You're very dependent on the sale, right? Whereas anything long-term, whether it's house hacking or BRRRRs, it's much more forgiving.
Excellent. And then we'll take 2 more questions. What if you don't have a W-2 and cannot get conventional financing? What's your best option to finance the home and the rehab?
So to finance a home and rehab, that's usually more of a hard money loan, right? You can get through conventional too, but they don't typically work as well. They're a little bit harder to get those rehab loans with conventional. So I would say obviously hard money to acquire and rehab. However, if you're planning to BRRRR and you don't have an exit strategy, you should not buy it, right? And so there are different types of loans that are not based on your personal income. That's only based on the cash flow on the property. And so we at Certain Lending, we do some of those loans as well. So I can take a look. But the other method is maybe partner with someone, right? I mean, I'd consider that in the future where at one point, I mean, if you invest a lot, you're going to get to the point where conventional either is no longer possible because you've retired, right? Or it's just really hard to get because the more properties you have, the more headache it is to show everything.
And last question is, going back to the deal that you gave us the example of can you do all 3 properties in a rolled up single conventional loan, or was that a commercial loan rolling up the 13 doors?
So that loan up front was essentially a hard money loan, right? Or a private loan. On the back end, I needed to refinance the 2 residential, like the triplex and the triplex and the fourplex individually into 2 different conventional loans, right? And then the sixplex, I don't have a plan for yet. I am pretty good at finding financing one way or the other. And so I'm pretty confident if I call enough lenders. I mean, I think I've talked to so many different lenders these days. So it's just, and luckily I have, just with working with Certain Lending, I have access to public records where I can actually pull up different commercial lenders in different states based on their volume and their transactions. And again, just very targeted calling. But it is hard. I mean, I can tell you commercial is hard, especially at those price points, right? So, but one way or another, we'll get it done.
Excellent. And I think that that's a theme that we see all the time. If you find a good enough deal, there is a way to finance it. And so I think this was a really good example of you being persistent and finding a solution for lots of problems that came up during that deal. So thanks for giving it as an example.